Okay, so the next program that I'm going to cover is The Bridge, and this is the Bridge 2.0, which is a little bit different from Bridge 1.0. Bridge 1.0 was a free program, and you could still get it free from barbellmedicine.com. Barbell Medicine is a group that used RPE that split from Mark Ripito of Sterling Strength once they started to have some different ideas of when people should get off of the novice linear progression and the way that they should do it. Starting Strength tended to prefer that you decrease volume and you maintain or increase intensity in order to make progress. Barbell Medicine said, no, the problem with novice linear progression is it's no longer enough volume. So removing volume really just decreases the training stimulus. And also, they are big proponents of RPE, and you'll see a lot of things that tend to be very familiar if you know reactive training systems, and that's because Jordan Feigenbaum is actually coached by Mike T from RTS. So the Bridge, it does have a lot of that heritage from starting strength. So if you love overhead pressing, you're going to love this. I hate overhead pressing. I felt like it had no connection whatsoever to my bench press, and bench press is heavier, so by default that makes it better, right? Any case, this was designed to follow on after the novice linear progression once you start stalling on that. So one of the things that you'll see is a lot more exercise variation versus the novice linear progression, so a lot less vanilla squatting, deadlifting, bench pressing, and overhead pressing. It is still, however, a 3-day per week program. And I think that's a niche thing that barbell medicine does. They really do prefer to have lower frequencies per week, and as a result, you'll see, because you're limited to 3 days and they advocate for more volume, you will see significantly longer sessions. I personally think 3 days per week is just too few days to play with. In order to hit the frequencies that I find to be ideal. So in any case, let's go straight into the metrics. And the way I have designed this is I have said that the person has followed the program to a T. This person has what you would consider a normalized total. So because you have 4 lifts instead of 3, you're going to still stick with that your deadlift is normally 40% of the powerlifting total, squat is around 35% of powerlifting total, and bench press is around 25% of the total. Now, once you get into the overhead press, it's about 17% of the total. So I have elected to make it 250 for bench, 170 for overhead press, 350 for squat, and 400 for deadlift. So that is your reference point for all the tonnages. That's going to be a little bit different if you don't have a normally proportioned total. So first of all, I'll say that much like RTS, there is a lot of reliance on variation. And it is a lot more variation than I personally prefer. Not to say that it's wrong, it's just a preference they follow. Because it's 3 days per week, you are going to see a lot of repeat efforts. And you are going to see a lot longer sessions, as I said before. So you're going to get a lot of work in a short amount of time. When it comes to sets, you'll see you start off at like 12 sets of squats, and for some reason in this, you actually start off with only 3 sets of bench press, which is really low because they immediately kick it up to 10 sets the next week. The way that I understand this is they are looking at this from the lens of bench pressing and overhead pressing are essentially lumped together, and they just consider pressing volume. And if you think about it that way, then you're going from 3 to 6 in overhead press, so you're getting 6 total any pressing movements the first week into 16. But I think that's actually the way that they're looking at it. Deadlifting, when you consider that, it's only 6 sets, but if you think about it from the fact that people are getting at max 2 sets per week on starting strength, it is a huge difference. And squats, you're normally getting about 9 sets per week on starting strength. So going up to 12 is not too crazy. However, there are a lot of things to take in consideration. I have included other metrics because I have thought, okay, well, if you're supposed to go from starting strength, is that transition in tonnage and volume actually harmful, or is it on the whole good? So I have included normalized tonnages from the same proportion total distribution and coming from a novice linear progression. The only difference is rather than saying, okay, I'm going to alternate deadlift and power clean, I just said no, they stayed with deadlift the whole time. Because honestly, power clean's dumb for general strength. It just is. It doesn't have much to do with general strength development. Anyone who says different is wrong. It's more for power development, and that's why it's in there. And really, I don't see why it's necessary. That seems like an arbitrary statement on its own. So, what does it look like? Well, you could see from the number of lifts that you're seeing a general trend to increase from weeks 1 to 4, and it is an 8-week program. I believe week 1 is actually considered week 0 in the template, and it is also said that it's optional. However, it is like a small reduction in volume when compared to other weeks, so I decided to include it, and you'll probably see why. So you can see that it increases, and then it has this kind of wave-like pattern. And when you look at the intensities, it kind of dips to accommodate that volume, especially in the deadlift most profoundly, but not on the squat. And then you see a steady increase of average intensity and peak intensity. And then when you look at the number of sets, you see increase in number of sets, and then same kind of thing where you have that ramping down and ramping back up, and then a decrease to actually get you into more of a peak state, right? And then the tonnages, it follows roughly the same, even though you're seeing increases in lifts and number of sets, it's actually the same here. Now, this tonnage includes 4 weeks of a normalized starting strength average, right? So 4 weeks before, because that's the way the estimated exponentially weighted acute chronic workload ratio works. It works off of 4 weeks. So if you start on week 1, it is taking the last 3 weeks into account. So one thing to know about acute chronic workload ratio is that the sweet spot is 0.8 to 1.3. 1.3 to 1.5 is increased risk, but it's not crazy. Once you get over 1.5, that's where it gets really crazy, and that's when it's a crazy amount of fluctuation in the tonnage that they normally see, or workload that they normally see. And you'll see when you look at tonnage of everything, you do see kind of that flat part with starting strength, and then a huge shoot from week 1 to week 2. However, on the whole, it doesn't look that bad from all tonnage. And it's worth noting that the tonnage for the bridge is actually only from main lifts and close variations. There are no accessories. There is a conditioning day involved, but it's really all time dependent, and I haven't included it. If you did include it, yeah, you might see some increased tonnages, but it's by design not predictable. It's like the most amount of work that you could complete of usually pulling type movements. There is outside of conditioning, there actually is no pulling other than off the floor with the deadlift. So once you look at this in terms of the acute chronic workload ratios, everything except the deadlift is kind of in the sweet spot, right? But you look at the deadlift, and it really takes off. Even on week 1, it's at 1.5, and it's like, ooh, well, that's not good. And I think that's kind of counterintuitive, because you got to think, like, starting strength is allergic to volume. And of the volume they are allergic to, they are most allergic to deadlift volume. You're going from 3 sets of 5 on every other lift, and then deadlifts for some reason is always 1 set of 5. And their reason is that it's just more fatiguing, and it will burn you out. It will fry your CNS. And I don't think that's the case. That's just their opinion. And that's probably why deadlifts stall on starting strength, is because it is such a low amount of stimulus, right? So to see acute chronic workload ratio shoot up that high, yeah, it's a little crazy. One thing I would say is not the to again mitigate the fact that the acute chronic workload ratio isn't a huge concern because they were getting really low volumes to begin with. If you're going from 2 sets at max per week and immediately tripling that on week 1, the intro week, or multiplying by 5 on the second week, that is a huge transition. That is, and you can't avoid that. I would prefer to see it ramp up a little bit slower. Maybe from 4 to 6 to 8 to 10, something like that. That's even faster than most people would really prescribe. Usually it's like 10% increases in intensity or volume per week, and that's normal, but you don't see that here. And that is my one complaint for this, is if you are supposed to transition over, it seems like a rapid transition. Granted, I don't think it's a problem for most people. However, looking at it just by the numbers, it seems like a little much. So if you look at this, it is really hard to understand what it's doing. Like, yeah, you could see that you're trying to accumulate volume early on, but then you get this wave-like undulation later, and it makes no discernible sense in really any lift, to be honest. It's a training program, but does it seem like it's guided towards a specific goal? No, I don't think it is. And if you look at some of their other programs, they equally don't make any sense. And you could also say, like, oh, well, that's because they're not following traditional periodization models and they're probably doing some emergent strategy stuff. Like, well, first of all, you can't do emerging strategies with a cookie cutter template. That's impossible. A lot of that is taking it week by week and understanding what you're responding to, right? Or taking blocks and trying to understand what you're responding to. So I don't think that holds any water at all. And I don't think that's worth taking into consideration. I don't think that's what it is. I think it's just not a very well thought out program, if that makes sense. There are certain things I'm willing to ignore, like this deadlift difference in tonnage from starting strength to what should be a leaving starting strength program. But some of these things just don't make any sense to me in almost any way. And like, even if you were to say, oh, well, they're just using RTS strategies, it's like, well, I don't know. I mean, RTS is big on stress index, and I look at this stress index, and I can't say that makes a crazy amount of sense to me either. I don't know what this program is doing, other than just saying, surprise, here's some goddamn volume. Any case, and you'll see it like in these color codes of these estimated or exponentially weighted moving average of acute chronic workload ratios. It's getting high. It's up to 2 right here. And granted, it does start dropping off, but it's high. And if you do a rolling average, it's really not any better, especially in the beginning. Exponentially weighted is supposed to be more sensitive and actually tends to be a little bit more forgiving in some cases. And if you were to use that rolling average, well, bench press, it immediately throws you out. And total, it immediately throws you out. Like, there's no way of looking at this statistically and saying, oh, no, it's fine. Now, in terms of what the program actually is, here's what your average intensities, peak intensities, and you'll see a lot of like differing, you'll see a wider standard deviation of intensities. Normally what you'll see is you'll see a lot more lower rep, higher effort type bench pressing, And I think that's agreeable. I think bench press in general does respond really well to that more than other lifts, not as much as deadlifts, or deadlifts don't respond as robustly to like low or higher intensity efforts. And deadlifts will usually be lower reps, lower effort. Squats will be moderate reps, moderate effort. On the whole, I believe. There is some variance in the rep schemes, rep and RPE schemes, but that's generally how it goes. And the way they end up prescribing this, it is mostly RPE, and a lot of it does build off of the idea of doing a single at 8 RPE in order to get an estimated 1 RM. And then they'll have you back off by an arbitrary percentage, anywhere from 20% to 5%. And I believe doing that method, yeah, it's nice, but if it's in a template, then you can automate that very easily. And that is one thing that the Bridge doesn't do. It doesn't do this in a template. It does this in a PDF. So you have to track it all on your own. Now, granted, you could buy Bridge 2.0 and you'll get a template. But in my experience, the templates I've seen out of Barbell Medicine, they're not put together extremely well. And I believe if we're going to go back to the 3 criteria, is it safe? Well, I think kind of it mostly is safe. I've heard plenty of people run this and they never had an injury issue. So I don't think that's even though the stats say it might be dangerous, I'm not sure if it is. So I would give the pass on safety. It's safe, in my opinion. And is it easy to adhere to? And part of being, or can you adhere to it? And I think part of adhering to it is, do you understand it? And to be honest, I don't think it does very well on that. I think some people struggle going from vanilla lifts to variations, and some people struggle from going to a linear approach to adding 5 to 10 pounds per week to going to percent based, but RPE makes it even harder. And then having both RPE and variations on week 1 or on week 0 right off the bat seems really tough to get into. And I do feel like the first 2 weeks are just confusing guesswork. But maybe that's just me. It took me a while to learn RPE, and to be honest, I think it's a little daunting to throw at a person to begin with. So, is it easy to understand? I would argue no. However, I do know plenty of people who seem to feel like it was easy enough for them to figure out and understand, which is okay, I guess. And then there's the whole idea of not only is it easy to understand, but is it possible? And I think that's where you start running into issues because it is a 3-day program. 3 days is not a lot of days to fit in this amount of work. Most people are running like 2-hour programs. And I'm not saying, oh, any program that's 2 hours is bad. But if you're coming from starting strength and you are used to having shorter sessions, not that many sets, then yeah, it is a little bit harder. I don't know why they didn't just kick this up to 4 days. Like, that would have been the easy way around it. Kick it up to 4 days. I feel like they are trying to drag enough of the same crowd over, so they're trying to retain a lot of the basic characteristics of starting strength without keeping a lot of its negative characteristics. However, I believe 3-day per week is a negative characteristic, and it is something they should have abandoned in favor of higher frequency. Just because not only is it a lot of work, but they are developing 4 lifts. They're not developing 3 lifts. You could run a powerlifting program easily on 3 days per week. It's not hard. But developing 4 lifts is a little bit harder. And you could say, oh yeah, but pressing, bench pressing, all the same thing. No, I would argue it's not the same thing. They both involve a lot of front delt, but one involves the chest, one involves the traps. Like, once your elbows get past your shoulders, the deltoids stop contributing as much. It is more about involvement of the upper trap. So you're working completely different things. So you can't say, oh, it's all the same thing because they're both pressing motions. Well, if that was the case, then you could say, oh, well, the squat and the deadlift are essentially the same. So why not just invest all your volume in only squats or only deadlifts? It doesn't work like that. They are distinct enough. I don't think it works well as a 3-day program. And I think a lot of that is kind of inherited habits from starting strength. And honestly, I don't think it's something they could avoid because that is their main draw. Not a lot of their appeal is actually from powerlifters. It's from people who are leaving starting strength, which have tended to like dismiss powerlifting. Like, oh, well, we're general strength. We're not like these 3 lifts and being competitive at those and doing gamism type stuff like reducing ROM or sumo deadlifts or ultra wide benches or whatever excuses they have. Would I recommend this program? Yeah, it's better than starting strength. Would I recommend it generally speaking? Maybe, maybe not, to tell you that, to be honest. I do have friends who have run this. They liked it. They said it was good. So I can't complain too much there. Here are the variations you're working with. 2 count pause squat, tempo squat, pinch squat. And you can see by where these 1RMs show up, like how frequently they're repeated. So tempo squats are for 3 weeks. 2 count pause squats are for 4 weeks. So you get at least 4 exposures to it to learn how to rate RPE for it. And then pinch squats and beltless squats. And I would argue beltless is not that different of a variation. I think that's kind of pointless. I think that would have been more useful early on, since you want to keep it somewhat familiar. Bench press, close grip, 1 count, 3 count, and pin press. Pin press only has 1 exposure. 3 count, 3 exposures, 1 week off.